Affairs and International Development, conformément à l'article 108.
Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Thursday, October 22nd, 2020, the committee is resuming its study on vulnerabilities that were created and exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic.
As usual, I encourage all participants to mute their microphones when they're not speaking and direct their comments through the chair. When you have 30 seconds left in your questioning or speaking time, I will signal you with this piece of paper in a very analog fashion. Interpretation services are available through the globe icon at the bottom of your screens. Maintenant, j'aimerais souhaiter la bienvenue.
Now I'd like to welcome our witness, Christian Champigny, who is the Director, Manager for International Programs, and Florence Massicotte-Belleville, International Project Officer.
Lorraine Swift, Executive Director of Change for Children Association, or CFCA, and Chris Eaton, Executive Director, World University Service of Canada. I will now turn the floor over to Fondation Paul Gérin-Lajoie pour les remarques d'ouverture de.
I'll turn it over to the Foundation, Paul Gérin-Lajoie, for their opening statement.
By members, but I will allow all witnesses up to 5 minutes of opening remarks. Fondation Paul Gérin-Lajoie, la parole est à vous.
The floor is yours, Fondation Paul Gérin-Lajoie. Thank you very much to the committees. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Education is a basic human right and a powerful agent for change that is vital to the achievement of each of the 17 Sustainable Development Objectives. The international community is aware of the transformative power of education, therefore set itself a goal to provide inclusive and equitable quality education and to promote ongoing learning opportunities for everyone from now until 2030. The Paul Gérin-Lajoie Foundation has made this objective the heart of its mission. It must be remembered that even prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, the world was already facing many challenges in the education sector. For example, 258 million children and youths old enough to attend either primary or secondary school were not receiving educated. Children living in vulnerable countries or conflict zones were twice as likely not to be in school. Girls were 1.5 times more likely than boys to be excluded from receiving education. Today, the pandemic is jeopardizing even further our ability to meet this global objective and is threatening the advances made in education. This is causing the most significant disruption of education in history. 94% of the world's students have suffered from the impacts of the pandemic as a result of the lockdown, representing $1.6 billion children. The crisis has highlighted the significant digital divide amongst countries. Students, particularly girls living in low and medium income countries, especially those who have been displaced or refugees, have very little access to remote learning measures. School closures have resulted in an increase of unpaid domestic and caregiver activities for girls, teens, and young women, thereby limiting their access to education. The crisis has exposed girls and young women to a variety of risks threatening their protection and depriving them of the structure and confidence that is usually afforded by attending school. The pandemic has already led to an increase in a lot of situations. The negative impact will be further heightened as a result of a possible world economic crisis. A reduction in household income, which will result in a higher number of school dropouts. Indeed, it's estimated nearly 24 million children will have to drop out or may not have access to school. And quitting school will go hand in hand with child labor, sexual exploitation, and teen marriage. Cutbacks in national education budgets will also have a direct impact on the schools and teaching staff. The likelihood of considerable reductions in development assistance could lead to a slash in education aid of $2 billion American dollars by 2022. The Gérin-Lajoie Foundation has seen the impacts of this crisis in its own international projects. To give you an example, thanks to the funding provided by Global Affairs Canada, the Foundation is currently carrying out a project to educate girls who are either refugees or displaced in Burundi, Rwanda, and in the Democratic Republic of Congo. In the Mahama camp in Rwanda, more than 60,000 Burundis have been in pandemic lockdown, and for many of them, the only opportunity to make outside is found on the outside of the camp. Schools have had to close. Based on our observations, we predict a significant number of girls will not be returning to school because they'll have to support their families financially. Moreover, we've seen an increase in teen pregnancies, another significant factor that will make it more difficult for them to return to school. For many children in this camp, particularly particularly for girls and teens. The pandemic will mean a loss of or delay in education. And this will have an impact on the future of an entire generation. To conclude, our foundation wants to add its voice to the 100 education advocacy organizations that support the Save Our Future white paper, which has recommended a series of measures in the medium and long term to avoid an education catastrophe. We'd also like to draw the committee's attention to two key aspects of this white paper, which in our opinion are worthy of particular attention. First of all, in response to the crisis, we may be tempted to focus on playing catch-up, concentrating on children who have recently been impacted by the education deficit and an overuse of computer-assisted learning. This would, in fact, draw attention away from the pre-existing basic structural problems in education. It's vital that the policies and reforms in the education sector not be reactive and short term. They must focus on proven measures, particularly in strengthening the teaching staff. Secondly, it's important that we protect funding for education. That means preserving the education budgets for developing countries and protecting official development assistance. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Champagny.
Over to our next set of opening remarks, Mr. Scott Walter of Code. Please, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. My observations are based on the experiences of Code, a Canadian NGO established 60 years ago to support development through education, and that of our partners and the programming that we jointly support in Africa. Quality education is empowering, allowing the individual the chance to realize their full potential and contribute to the well-being of their family, their community, and to the nation as a whole. This is the basis for global frameworks such as Education for All. Initially, there was consensus that Education for All meant prioritizing universal enrollment in primary school, but it was quickly realized that that only mattered if the students were actually gaining skills that they were learning. Without quality, there's little return on investment. So how to measure that sought-after quality? In that regard, there's no more foundational indicator than whether or not the child can read and write. It's the canary in the coal mine, notification of problems to come. A child can't read and so falls further and further behind until they drop out as an illiterate. One learns to read in order to comprehend, and the failure to acquire the skills of literacy impacts the ability to move beyond basic learning and onto higher order thinking skills so needed in today's world, the skills of problem solving and critical thinking. For those of us working in the sector, it's been clear for a great number of years that far too many students are not learning to read and write. The scenario is so dire across the developing world that the World Bank declared a learning crisis, one that threatens countries' efforts to build human capital and achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. Make no mistake about it, human capital, which is basically a measure of productivity, is the most important component of wealth globally. In low-income countries, human capital makes up some 40% of wealth. In high-income countries, human capital makes up over 70% of wealth. According to UNESCO, if all students in low-income countries left school with elementary reading skills, 171 million people could be lifted out of poverty, the equivalent of a 12% cut in global poverty. In other words, there's a huge cost to illiteracy and poor quality education. So we welcome the call by the World Bank to cut by half the global rate of learning poverty, defined as the percentage of 10-year-old children who cannot read. So you may be thinking, wasn't he supposed to talk about the impact of COVID-19? Well, I am, in the sense that the evidence shows that school closures caused by the pandemic exacerbated all the previous existing inequalities, and that those children who are already most at risk of being excluded from a quality education, the poorest, the most marginalized, have been most affected. Girls are particularly vulnerable. Code, for example, is very active in Sierra Leone and Liberia, and we know from the Ebola school closures of a couple years ago that girls were less likely to return once schools reopened. With lockdowns and restrictions in the economy in free fall, it was the girls who took on greater responsibilities that kept them at home or even forced them into early marriage. We also saw that with isolation, girls were at increased risk of sexual exploitation and teenage pregnancy rates doubled. During COVID and beyond, we feel it's critically important to address the learning crisis by focusing on literacy. CODE believes that this can best be accomplished by supporting sustained access to relevant, quality reading and learning materials, with a corresponding effort to ensure educators have the skills to use those materials effectively. Access to technology is very limited where we work, and in many cases, the solution is low-tech. Support the local publishing industries, for example, to produce great learning materials through traditional print, or virtual classrooms with radio reading teachers. Digital learning, access to the internet, the creation of interactive learning modules are probably best focused on the teachers rather than the students. The loss of learning is real and severe, and the resulting impact of greater levels of learning poverty will be felt for years. But we're not without tools, and we know more can be done to support the foundational skills of literacy. We need to support kids wherever they are to become readers. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And we'll now turn to the Change for Children's Association. Lorraine Swift, the floor is yours for 5 minutes, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to this committee. This year, Change for Children is celebrating its 45th anniversary of support for rights-based development in the Global South and an award-winning global education program in Canada. Based in Western Canada, we do appreciate being included in this discussion. For me, it is an honor to be invited to testify here, as I've worked in international development for the past 25 years. Given that you've already heard testimony from many others in this field, my presentation will focus on our unique perspective as an Alberta-based NGO working with Indigenous populations in the developing world that are already vulnerable, marginalized, and hardest hit by the impacts of climate change. Change for Children enjoys significant support for our work from Albertans and Canadians, including from Global Affairs Canada. Donor support for our climate change mitigation program and for our education and health projects in Indigenous communities actually increased in 2020. Our Brigade program, while not offered currently, obviously, allows Canadian medical, dental, optometry, and teacher professionals to offer much needed support and services to some of the world's most remote populations. Since 2000, our brigades have taken over 1,000 Canadians into the UNESCO Biosphere Reserve called Bosowas in Nicaragua. Home to the Miskito and Mayagna Indigenous peoples, poverty and food insecurity have increased here because of climate change and because of COVID. This area was hit hard by the back-to-back hurricanes Eta and Iota that ravaged Central America last fall. In some of the world's most remote Indigenous communities, we see families struggling to survive in the face of their existing vulnerabilities, now exacerbated by the pandemic. We also see that women and girls suffer the most. Persisting gender discrimination means that women and girls living in extreme poverty are the most vulnerable to some of the least visible impacts of COVID and of climate change. We see girls suffering from disrupted education, time poverty, and increased risks. But there is a solution. We know that quality education for girls is a public health and a climate change solution. Education empowers girls to take control over their own bodies, enabling them to determine when and if to bear children. Fewer children mean healthier populations and lower carbon emissions. Education tackles the underlying inequalities that increase girls' vulnerability to COVID and to climate change. In the Americas, the regions with the lowest levels of education for girls are Indigenous. Realizing the rights for Indigenous people is essential to recovery. Earlier this month, Elon Musk offered $100 million for the best carbon capture technology. His tweet was met with the response, "Congratulations to whoever invents forests." Forest preservation is our best defense against climate change and against COVID-19 and against future pandemics. While not the inventors of forests, Indigenous peoples are indeed their stewards. Indigenous people in all countries of the world fall into the most vulnerable health category. They have significantly higher rates of diseases, higher mortality rates, and lower life expectancies than their non-Indigenous counterparts. Change for Children works with Indigenous communities in some of the most remote forest regions of the Americas. We work promoting climate change adaptation and mitigation. We work promoting technology-enabled Indigenous language education. We work with Indigenous populations marginalized from all services due to their remoteness and because of their ethnicity. And there is a high likelihood that they will be marginalized from future access to COVID vaccines as well. Today, we are facing overlapping global health emergencies, COVID-19 and climate change. Both exacerbate pre-existing inequalities and vulnerabilities. Both have the ability to bring health systems and economies to their knees, and both dial back progress on every human development indicator by at least 10 years. To build back better, we must design our COVID recovery plans to facilitate collaboration amongst all actors. Small and medium organizations, or SMOs, like Change for Children, working for decades with strong connections in some of the world's most remote communities, are central and essential to this recovery. But we cannot design effective recovery plans if we have no funding to implement them. We cannot reach the most vulnerable and remote communities without means. Global Affairs Canada has not called for proposals from SMOs since early 2019. COVID has taught us that we are not safe in Canada until we are all safe globally. We must do more. We continue to need stable and consistent funding from the Government of Canada for SMOs, to build back better from COVID, and to continue our vital and important work towards achieving the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And for our final set of opening remarks, we will go to Chris Eaton of the World University Service of Canada. The floor is yours for 5 minutes, sir.
Thank you. My organization, WUSC, works to expand education and employment opportunities for marginalized youth and has a strong presence in Iraq, Jordan, the refugee camps and host communities of northern Kenya, northern Uganda, and in South Sudan. And in all of these places, we have been working with local institutions to foster better quality education and employment outcomes for girls, young women, and refugees. And as in Canada, all of these young people have been affected by the pandemic, with the closure of schools and a marked decrease in local economic activities and employment opportunities. In these circumstances, refugee and out-of-school girls are particularly vulnerable to significant learning losses and to the lost social protection that schools often provide. Our current concern is that many of these young people will not return to class as schools open, and that those who do so will not receive the support they need to catch up and stay in school. This will result in higher dropout rates, lower graduation rates, early marriage, and depressed future incomes. Indeed, we are already seeing a significant decline in the return rates of girls to now open schools in the Kakuma and Dadaab refugee camps in northern Kenya, where we work. But refugees and their host communities have not been passive in this context. Instead, they have been part of the response to the education crisis that COVID has caused and should form an important part of the longer-term solution. For example, we've witnessed many instances of refugee and host communities undertaking door-to-door campaigns to identify vulnerable students and organizing peer support and learning clubs and ed tech sharing groups, all initiatives that have prevented some dropouts and learning losses, provided some ongoing social protection, and perhaps most importantly, that have helped to sustain a sense of hope amongst these vulnerable youth. These efforts are unfortunately under-recognized, undervalued, and under-supported by governments and the international development community. And this is incredibly short-sighted, as these kind of refugee-led initiatives are an essential complement to the other investments in teacher education, in smaller classroom sizes, and in the integration of education technology in remote classrooms and communities, all of which needs to happen. So in this context, the government's recently announced Together for Learning campaign, which seeks to mount an international effort to ensure that all refugee and displaced children and youth have access to the education they need and deserve, is well timed. However, to realize this campaign's potential and meet the increased needs of vulnerable youth and children caused by COVID, the government really needs to ensure sufficient funding, in part by investing in innovative approaches that support refugee-led responses to the education challenges that they face. And now really is the time to invest. So I would conclude my remarks with two recommendations. First, the government has already committed to allocate no less than 10% of Canada's international assistance budget to education, but to education broadly. And now is the time to further focus these resources to direct a significant percentage of this commitment to the Together for Learning campaign. recognizing that refugee education has not received the level of support that it deserves in Canada's international development efforts. Second, the government should create a fund directly to support refugee voices, leadership, organizations, and responses in the education sector. This could be modeled on the Equality Fund, which the government helped to create in 2019 to permanently change the model of support to women's rights organizations. Similarly, a fund to permanently change the model of support to refugee-led organizations and responses would address a critical gap in the global refugee support architecture. It could form an important new tool, a new instrument in Canada's international development toolkit, and could become a pillar of the Together for Learning campaign. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'd like to thank our witnesses again for their opening remarks. We'll now go into our first round of questions, and these are 6-minute segments, and leading us off will be Mr. Diot.
Thank you very much, and thanks to all the witnesses here, especially for all the good work that you do. I'm going to ask a very general question. We've certainly heard from every witness that's come before this committee about how important it is that children get to school and get educated in person. And of course, we've seen throughout the world a big push, especially by teachers and even teachers unions, saying, no, we can't send kids back. It's too dangerous. COVID infections are going to go through the roof, et cetera, et cetera. First of all, I'm wondering if we've seen a trend in underdeveloped countries where there is a push to keep kids out of school because of COVID fears. And secondly, how can we fight against that so that teachers will feel comfortable going back to the classroom, encouraging their students to come back and get an education, which we all agree is absolutely vital, especially in underdeveloped countries. And I'll just throw that open to each one of you to comment on.
I guess I'll jump in, Scott Walter. I think, in part to say that in Africa anyway, which is where we work, which is what I'm familiar with, there hasn't been that same reluctance, I think, to send their kids to school or to get them back into school. Now, that differs across the board, of course, but there's not much in the way of alternative. Online learning, technology, it's just simply not available. Kids do not have access to the internet. They don't have access to broadband. They don't have access to the devices that are needed. So it's not really like there's an alternative. Now, in some families, they make a choice already about how many of their children can go to school because there's a cost, even if there's no fees. And it does tend to be the boys who are prioritized over the girls. So we definitely need campaigns at the national level from the government, from NGOs to encourage kids to go back to school. For the most part, schools have reopened in Africa. And from my knowledge, kids are back in school and are ready to go. But that's, as everybody said, for example, the most marginalized girls, the most vulnerable, are not returning in the same numbers. So I guess that would be my comment, that there's just not the alternative to face-to-face classroom.
But others have opinions on that.
Yes, thank you. I would add to that school as a physical space has also its advantages, not only for education, but also as a sort of, not necessarily safe space, but as a point of reference and a place where in some instances, kids go to school and have one complete meal a day. In some areas, that is provided, and it's the only full meal that in some instances they will have. There's also protection for girls. That is one major advantage of the physical presence at school. So there are certain elements that go beyond the education aspect that let's say advocate for the school in presence, let's say. Thank you.
So
Any others have something to weigh in on?
Yeah, similarly, we haven't experienced the same reticence of teachers to return to the classroom or parents in general to send their kids back. We are witnessing a situation in which girls in particular are not returning with the same numbers as boys. We also have a situation in East Africa where schools were closed for a much longer period of time than they were here in Canada, and nothing was happening during that time period. And so there was, in some respects, a real pent-up demand to get back to school. But on the other hand, I think tougher choices in families about who to send back because of some of the barriers that families face or some of the choices that they make. And unfortunately, that disadvantages the people that we're most concerned about, the most vulnerable, refugees themselves and girls.
I will just add to that in so many places, and as we all testified to the already existing vulnerabilities that exist in for so many kids and also teachers, like in places where we work, they have no personal protection equipment. There's no way for them to protect themselves against, they have super overcrowded classrooms. So really, there are so many other places where we need to invest in order to be able to confront the dangers of COVID, that it is there are just so many things that require our attention, as well as COVID recovery plans.
Thanks very much. I'll just end it there because I see we're just ticking down the seconds. Thank you.
Thank you. That's appreciated, Mr. Diot. That may allow us to go to a brief second round. Our next 6-minute round goes to Ms. Sachs. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all of our witnesses for the wonderful, amazing work that you do for so many communities across the world, and the time and effort that's put in, and also particularly for your time with us today. I'd like to start with Mr. Walser in relation to CODE and the Transforming Girls Education Program in Sierra Leone, which the Government of Canada, I understand, is helping to support. I'm struck by the group's findings that for the girls in Sierra Leone, the approach was that, or what you noticed, that as the girls reached puberty, enrollment, retention, and completion rates declined, and that there was an increasing learning gap between girls and boys over time as they transition into secondary school. So we've heard that there's been a heightened reduction, obviously, in education during this time due to COVID. But I'd like you to, and we keep hearing that same statistic of the gap with girls, but we haven't honed into why there is that gender gap and what its impact is. And I'd really appreciate some insight on that. You're on mute, Mr. Walter.
Sorry. I'll try to respond to a couple of things. One, I think, is that like in Sierra Leone, for example, which is somewhat unique with its post-conflict scenario, but there's much fewer female teachers in the classroom, for one. So the girls don't have those mentors, those role models to look up to. So one of the things that the TGEP program is doing is paying for scholarships for young women to come into Teachers College to increase the number of girls, the number of women that are in teaching and in the classroom. Another thing is that girls are starting later than boys, and so one of the things that we know for sure is that if they don't catch up, if they don't advance, they will drop out. And that's in part because of the pressures from their families, that if they're not achieving, if that really the families would just as soon, quite often, to have them at home doing domestic work or working in the market. So there's also the pressures of early marriage. Girls are in Sierra Leone getting married at 13, 14, 15 years of age, and that's often an economic reality. In some countries, the ages are, in fact, quite a bit younger to where you first start seeing early marriage. But it's, I think that there's also still a gender imbalance in the sense of the quality of the materials. I've spoken about literacy and the importance of getting kids to be reading and writing, because it's the gate that opens up the rest of the learning to them. And if they aren't able to read and write, that they can't then progress in science and math and history or whatever the other subject might be. And often the learning materials, if available, put forward stereotypes of girls that really they should be looking to other, more domestic realities for themselves. So I think that gap it's one that's based on a number of things, on the quality of teaching, on the quality of the resources available, on the fact that they're starting late, on the fact that there's often more pressure for them to leave in the first place, and that there's just that there's a lack of role models. So I'm probably not doing a great job of expressing it, but these are the main points that are impacting young girls.
Thank you very much. Would any of the other witnesses want to weigh in on this in relation to other countries and their experiences in education? Mr. Eaton.
We've seen the gap actually close in a lot of countries in Africa, a lot of the places in which we work, and particularly close at a primary level. And in some respects, in a place like Kenya, girls are actually doing better often than boys in many of the districts of the country. And that gap is starting to close also at a secondary level. Where it's not closing are in those particularly fragile places, like the remote parts of Kenya or Sierra Leone, or the remote parts of northern Uganda or South Sudan, or amongst protracted refugee situations. And so I think there's an intuition there about where to focus our energy and resources, because those are the people who are particularly vulnerable. Girls in general are doing better in education across the continent, except in a number of really significant pockets where we need to attend our attention.
Okay, thank you. That actually leads me into my next question. So in February of this year, Minister Gould announced the launch of Together for Learning, which is a 3-year campaign to promote quality education and lifelong learning for refugees and vulnerably displaced people, especially children and youth. And with what you've just mentioned, Mr. Eaton, I'd like to know, with that commitment in place, how do you see our role over that 3-year commitment playing out? You did touch on this in your opening statements, and I'd like to unpack a little bit more, since we have made this commitment as a government to education for vulnerable communities where there is conflict.
Mr. Eaton, just a very brief answer, please.
So we don't know the details of the campaign yet because they're still being worked out, and we also don't know the financial commitment behind the campaign. So I think the campaign and the focus is well justified, but now we need to make sure that it's backed up by the resources necessary to have an impact.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Ms. Sachs. Monsieur Bergeron, vous avez la parole maintenant pour 6 minutes.
6 minutes. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'd also like to thank the witnesses for their testimony and these relevant reports on the work being done by this committee. It's very inspiring to hear you speak, to see just how determined you are to go forward despite the difficulties. From testimony to testimony, the picture that's being drawn is quite depressing. The last time I asked a question about hope. Is there still hope left? And seeing your dedication and determination, that helps us keep hope. So thank you so much for everything that you do. I'd like to begin perhaps with the Paul Gérin-Lajoie Foundation. In a press release and on your website, you quoted Nelson Mandela that says that education is the best weapon to change the world. And there are about 260 million young people, school-aged children, who don't get any education. You have operations both here and abroad. Is it still a challenge to ensure that people are literate in developing countries? Is it hard to get them interested in reading, in writing, so that they become capable? This is rendered even more complicated in certain countries, of course. The pandemic occurred. Well, we were already dealing with learning problems, with structural problems in developing countries, and we've been told time and time again that these issues have been made worse. And here in Quebec and Canada, we see it's hard to keep children motivated because of this remote learning. And statistically speaking, the pandemic does create additional challenges. This situation leads us to believe, and here I refer to what the World Bank had said, that the closure of schools for 3 months, 5 months, 7 months, and more will result eventually in a loss of income. And that will further heighten poverty. And this is what probably caused one of the witnesses to say, I think it was the foundation who said this, that we're looking at the most serious crisis in the world in terms of education. And added to that are the difficulties of getting access to vaccinations in these developing countries. What can be done systematically to deal with all of these problems, these multifaceted problems that we're experiencing currently? Where do we start, and in what order? Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Bergeron. This is obviously a very complicated question. You talked about hope. You talked about the 26 million children that don't have access to education. And this was, I think my colleagues from the other organizations would agree with me, that there has been improvement over the years in the area of education, but it's a very broad issue. There's the economic crisis that has created even more obstacles to access to education. My impression, based on the years of experience that I have acquired, is that people are thirsty for knowledge. They want to learn. And the quality of education and the structure for education, sometimes there are cultural obstacles as well that are missing. Where do we start? I think developing society is a good tool, but education, if we view it as, well, right now, we're witnessing a catastrophe in the area of education, and we have the White Book, which has been supported by 100 different organizations. This white paper may help you. You should read that and really have a better understanding of the pandemic crisis and education. Education is a breath of hope, and we can't resolve everything right away, but we have to constantly try to step further, work harder, and to ensure that we are able to educate young people, especially girls. We have to support them with funding, as Mr. Eaton mentioned. And things are going to take shape. It's a gradual process. And bit by bit, Well, we have to start somewhere, and education is a good first step. Thank you, Mr. Bergeron. Mr. Champagny.
To Ms. McPherson, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank all of our witnesses today. I'm always very I'm impressed with the work that organizations such as yours do. It's nice to see some of my past colleagues in the call this afternoon. I wanted to start a little bit. One of the things that this committee doesn't often get to hear from is from the variety of different organizations that are engaged in international development efforts around the world. And I'm delighted that we have a number of organizations representing small and medium-sized organizations. I think it's important that those voices get amplified because, of course, it's always a little bit harder for a smaller organization to be able to engage with the federal government in a meaningful manner. So I'm going to ask the first couple of questions, if I could, to CODE and to Change for Children. In terms of the role of small and medium organizations in Canada and the role in terms of our official development assistance, can you talk about how important it is that we are supporting our small and medium organizations and what key pieces, what key roles SMOs play in the development landscape? Lorraine, Ms. Swift, could I start with you, please?
Sure. I'm always great at answering this question, why should SMOs be funded? We are very agile and we're innovative, and we can pivot quickly to respond to the needs of the communities where we have been connected to, like, very specific people in specific places from across the globe for sometimes, 40 to 60 years. There's SMOs across this country that have been around for decades and that really gain their support from their local communities, right? So we mobilize and leverage support from across the country. Here in Alberta, not so much these days, but there is a lot of wealth here, and we have been able to double the capacity of our Global Affairs Canada funded projects with our matching grants from Albertans and Albertan corporations and foundations. And we also connect Albertans and indeed Canadians from across the country, from small towns, from Indigenous communities, with our communities that we work with overseas. So through our brigade programs, we take people that wouldn't necessarily understand the details of international development, and they get to see firsthand the impacts of their support. We also educate Canadians. We have school outreach programs. We're in the schools. We're making presentations. We're doing that, across Alberta, Saskatchewan, and BC. And we basically bring, the global community to Western Canada, which is something like, if we didn't have NGOs based out here, maybe the involvement in international development would end with writing a check and mailing it to Ottawa. So, I mean, there's lots to say about how we engage Canadians and how we leverage support from across the country.
Thank you so much. Mr. Walters, could I turn to you next, please?
Thank you. I guess what I would respond is that as a smaller organization, we're not able to be all things to all people. So as a result, we're very, very focused. We've been around for a long time, but we're very focused on the question of the quality of education. I mean, if there's one thing that's universal, it's that parents want a better life for their children, but they're not stupid. And if they don't see their kids gaining or learning at school, they'll pull them out. So what we do is focus on what we think can make the greatest impact. Often with the big organizations, they're involved with all manner of community and school and infrastructure programs. But a school is not a school until there's a teacher inside it with good books. And so that's where we focus. And it happens to be something that Canada knows a lot about. We produce some of the best teachers in the world. And we also know a lot about the importance of Indigenous publishing to produce a national literature that children can relate to, that speaks to them, that reflects what their reality is in a relevant way, relevant being linguistically relevant, quality-wise, linked to the curriculum. So that's what we do, and we think we have a special role to do that.
Thank you very much. I'm going to actually turn, speaking about relevant curriculum and education, I'm going to turn actually to Mr. Eaton, if I could. You spoke a bit about the importance of education for refugees. And we know that women and girls are disproportionately impacted by COVID. We know that girls are at most risk, especially when they are refugees, when they are Indigenous, when they are living with a disability. How do we make sure that as we develop the program, the Together for Learning program, that it meets the needs of those girls, that refugees are at the table, part of those discussions to develop that? And what would you as a Canadian organization like to see that program look like?
Thank you. So we have a tremendous network of people who have the lived experience of being refugees here in Canada, who have actually come to Canada because of the education opportunities offered to them in other parts of the world and here in Canada, kind of emphasizing that focus on education. So there's this tremendous kind of expertise across Canada that we could draw on to inform the design of the campaign itself. But I think the campaign at its heart has to have something that accentuates, values, and supports refugee leadership itself, not only in Canada, but I think globally in the places in which we want to do some more education work. And so, you know, we have this Equality Fund that does outstanding work with women's rights organizations. How about something just like that that supports refugee-led responses, refugee voices, refugee agency in the education space in the parts of Africa where all of us work, and other parts of the world as well. So I'd like to see something like that at the heart of the campaign.
Thank you very much.
Ms. McPherson, thank you. Thank you very much. Colleagues, we're hovering at the 10-minute mark of our scheduled time with witnesses. I would propose to do what we've done a few times before, which is to take that time and divide it evenly to give every party a chance to ask another question, somewhere in the neighborhood of 2.5 minutes per questioner. And if I could just ask our witnesses, there have been a couple of times where interpretation had difficulty picking up the sound. It was marginal. It wasn't severe enough to interrupt, but if you could just speak as loudly and clearly into your microphone as possible, that would assist interpretation services greatly. Mr. Genuis, please take us through the first round of these 2.5 minute rounds.
Thank you so much to all of the witnesses. There is something that I would like clarity on. It's an important point. Ms. Swift, I wrote down that you said, quote, fewer children means healthier populations and lower carbon emissions. Did I get that correctly from you?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. All right. You know, I know that maybe at one time people would make the argument that fewer children was something that was desirable from a development perspective, and that happened in the context of various coercive population controls that tried to push this message on women that they should have smaller families, that they needed to have smaller families. A lot of emerging data. I mean, I'm referring to a paper by Wesley Peterson, The Role of Population Growth, that does a sort of historical survey. Who notes that in low-income countries, rapid population growth is likely to be detrimental in the short and medium term because it leads to large numbers of dependent children. In the long run, there is likely to be a demographic dividend in these countries as these young people become productive adults. We're seeing in countries which have had higher population growth rates, for example, dramatic economic growth, such as in many countries in Africa, and there are many other countries that, like China, that have had aggressive, coercive population control policies. That have been very violent in their implications, and the impact of that now is an aging population and inevitable impending demographic problems. So, I mean, I guess, like, is the case you're making that we should emphasize choice for people, or is it that we should try to push the message that people should not have larger families, even if that's what they wish to have in some of these countries?
Well, I'm not sure how much time I have to respond to that, but I mean, it's well documented that family planning available to women allows them to, and girls, allows them to decide when to have children and how many to have. And that, like, just the basic math around carbon emissions from every person on the planet is contributing to climate change. So
yeah, can I just clarify though, ma'am? We're talking about two different things, right? There's the issue of giving people information and choice, and then there's the issue of pushing the message that you should have a smaller family. right?
Right.
Those are two conceptually distinct things, right?
And
Right.
just really quickly, please. We've only got seconds left.
Right. Well, women who have information about how to control how many children they have are typically having fewer children because they don't want to have 12 children. And no, so it's not pushing the message to have fewer children, but it is giving women choice to control their own bodies.
Thank you very much. We'll have to leave it there. Thank you, Mr. Genius. Mr. Fonseca.
Thank you, Chair. And let me thank the witnesses for the tremendous work you do. We are all so impressed by everything you're able to accomplish. I'm going to go along the same line of questioning Mr. Garnett, Mr. Genius just brought up. We've heard from many other witnesses around wraparound services, how important education is, in particular, health and reproductive education, health rights. And when young women and girls go to school, I'm sure they get this education about how important about their own bodies, about their choice, about also nutrition and being able to get food. We heard that from Code and Mr. Walter. Marriages at 13, 14, and 15, you know, just taking away the empowerment, the control that these young women and girls have. Can you tell us about that and how important it is to have sexual and reproductive education, health and rights education, how important that is for their empowerment?
If I'm jumping in, I suppose number one, I would say that with education, young women can make decisions. They can make informed decisions. So that's number one. With literacy, it leads on to higher order thinking skills. And really what comes with that is problem solving and critical thinking. So it's all about being able to make informed decisions once you have information to that information. But
and
yes,
sexual education, how important is sexual education and reproductive health rights?
It's critical. It's critical. And a comprehensive sexual education is critical to the equation that you're talking about. One of the questions in many of the countries we're working with, they're very conservative, traditional societies, and there's no allowing of that to be in the curriculum. Countries are now more and more opening up to that as they want to have stronger economies and healthier populations and literate peoples. And so they're opening up to that kind of curriculum-based program.
Yeah, and also nutritional education, et cetera. How do anybody else want to weigh in just how important it is that those young girls and women get that type of education to be able to have control with their lives?
Well, we definitely support the Feminist International Assistance Policy and the proliferation of information more and more in the schools, in the hands of young women around their sexual and reproductive health and rights to that sexual and reproductive health. And certainly there's a lot of programs now that we can thank the Government of Canada for providing leadership on. And certainly we, of course, need more funding to get those into the hands of the girl students. But that is definitely.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fonte. We'll have to leave it there. Thank you so much, both of you. Monsieur Bergeron, 2 minutes et demi, s'il vous plaît.
2.5 minutes, Mr. Bergeron. Yes, we were talking about the impact of COVID on learning in developing countries. I'd like to know what impact COVID has had on your operations. I'm thinking specifically of Change for Children Association. You were building schools in various communities. So what impact has COVID had on your operations in terms of efforts and in terms of literacy efforts in developing countries?
So we have an education program, a technology-enabled Indigenous mother tongue language education program that also includes sexual and reproductive health and rights education for girls in Guatemala that was closed down completely because of school closures. We have a similar program in Nicaragua where the schools remained open and we were able to continue both our teacher training program and our student learning programs in those schools. So it's quite variable in terms of where we're able to continue our work based on the local government's decisions and how they whether or not they've closed schools. Certainly, we've been responding to COVID. We also have large water projects across Central America. And in terms of water and sanitation, we've been able to provide a COVID response effort to the beneficiary populations there. But it's and then of course in Canada, we actually expected our revenues to go way down. We predicted a 60% decline in donations because of COVID, and also because we're based in Alberta and our economy is in difficult times right now. But actually, we saw our donations increase. So we know that Canadians are supportive of international development investment. We know that Albertans are supportive of international development investment, and we are impressed by our citizens' ability to support that.
Une autre réponse rapidement?
Another answer very quickly.
Work almost exclusively through local partners, so they've managed to continue to work. We've also had some very interesting programs where we've supported the local publications. They've developed anthologies to put them into homeschooling kits, distributed them, and then partnered with local radio stations to have radio reading hours that would reach students wherever they are.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Bergeron. Thank you very much, witnesses. And to finish off our round this afternoon, Ms. McPherson for 2.5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was quite compelled by the questions of Mr. Bergeron, but also I'd like to comment on how Mr. Walters talked about the cascading impact of education loss and what that looks like. I would love just a very quick comment from all our witnesses on what it would mean if we were able to have long-term, not just 3 years, but long-term predictable funding through the Government of Canada, and how that would impact your ability to do good work and recover from the impacts on your programming from COVID-19. Again, I'll start with Ms. Swift if I could.
Absolutely. Like we are running kind of from project to project with gaps between projects. We aren't able to right now commit long term to our partner organizations in the South or the communities that where we work or the participants in our programs. And we have been very lucky that like our funding continues from one funder to the next, and we're able to sort of continue programs. But it would be much more advantageous for us. We could leverage more support from Albertans and Canadians across the country if we were able to say we have this long-term funding from the Government of Canada. Will you also support this initiative? And we could do much more. And of course, we will have to do much more because the effects of COVID and climate change are profound.
Mr. Eaton, could I ask you the same question next, please?
We could work with our local partners and make long-term investments in quality education for the communities that we're concerned about. We're unable to do that fully at the moment, but longer-term predictable funding would allow us to do so and would be of great benefit to the people we're particularly concerned
about. Do I still have time, Chair?
You've got about 30 seconds, Ms. McPherson.
Mr. Walters or Mr. Champagne, either of you, if you had some comments on that.
Well, I'll just say very quickly that education is a long-term goal, and there's no silver bullet in education. So more than almost any other sector, you need predictability. You need long-term funding. You know, you invest in a child at age 6, and by the time they're 16, you start to see the return on that investment.
Thank you so much, Ms. McPherson. Colleagues, that takes us to the end of our time with our witnesses this afternoon. As usual, I'd like to thank all of them on our collective behalf for their expertise, their testimony, and most importantly, their service. It was great to spend time with you. We would have appreciated more time, but time is limited, and there's always an opportunity for you, if you haven't had a chance to express all your thoughts or recommendations, to address us in writing subsequent to this meeting. But thank you again. We'll allow you a few minutes to disembark, and we have some business to attend to after that, so we'll suspend the meeting for a couple of minutes. Thank you, colleagues.
Thank you.
Ms. McPherson. And we most recently in our discussion on this had an amendment on the floor that was introduced by Ms. Sahota, if I'm correct, and I'd like to hand her the floor to continue to speak to that amendment, and then we will take a speakers list as usual through the raise your hand feature, please. And Madam Clerk, if we could do the same thing that we did last time with respect to witness or members that are present in the committee room. Ms. Sahota, please go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you for the floor, Chair. I think I should probably start with a refresher for everybody, because the last time we spoke to this motion or my amendment, I believe it was last Thursday, so it was a week ago. So sorry, Ms. McPherson, that weren't able to get to it, I guess, on Tuesday. But anyways, I'm really glad we got our report done finally, or interim report, so that's good news at least. So my amendment was to Mr. Harris's motion that recognized.
Sorry, point of order, Mr. Chair.
Yes, okay. Please, Mr. Genius.
I would just encourage us to be careful about matters that were not concluded in camera being discussed, given that we are in public. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Genius. I'm glad I didn't get into detail with that. So thank you. Thanks for that heads up, and I will try my best to be more careful. Don't want the cat out of the bag about the report. Okay. So anyways, back to what I was on, the amendment to Mr. Harris's motion. The amendment that I proposed basically was a rewording of the first sentence, and so that the amendment, or so that the motion would read that the committee recognizes that due to global circumstances, the government has faced delays in the supply of vaccines for Canadians through national manufacturing and international procurement. The rest of it goes on as is. And then I have removed the final sentence of the motion. So if everyone has the motion in front of them, hopefully they have the amendment as well. The last sentence that is removed is finally that the committee report this motion to the House. The reason I've proposed these changes to Mr. Harris's motion is that maybe I'll start with finally that the committee report this motion to the House. I'm really opposed to us reporting every comment or feedback that we have to the House in this type of a way without having done some thorough study into it or investigation. The committee's work is to actually do some work into a matter and then report that to the House, like we had been doing on the study that we currently have before us. Not to make a statement and then just send it to the House. I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done on this issue. I'm not saying, I said last time, I appreciate the NDP's sentiments on this, but what I don't appreciate is us, without doing the work that this committee should be doing, just blocking up House time. And that is essentially what we're seeing all in many committees. We're just seeing motions being sent to the House so that they can be concurred in, and so that we can spend 4 hours of House time and delay a lot of important legislation. So I wanted to, make sure that all the members in this committee are aware, basically what the consequences of continuing to go down this road could be. And the consequences, the consequences we're currently going through right now are, we've got C14. C14 has not been given the due time that it needs to move forward. C14 is the fall economic statement. It is important for Canadians. It's important in the context of this pandemic. So just as the sentiment of this motion about vaccines, to poorer or middle income countries, I absolutely agree that this pandemic should be first and foremost on our minds as a government, and it is. But us delaying, support to Canadians, us delaying legislation in the House is not what is going to help Canadians or developing countries. Another piece of legislation that's in the House that I think is important for the safety of Canadians is C-19, enact amend the Canada Elections Act. Now that piece of legislation has not gotten, I don't think, any
point
time
of order,
in the
Chair.
House.
Sorry to interrupt.
One second. Yep, we have a point of order. Ms. McPherson.
Sorry to interrupt the member, but we are at very limited time, and I don't know that listing all of the bills that have to come forward to the House is actually how we want to move forward on this. We have not had sufficient time to talk about the actual meat of this motion yet in this House, despite the fact that I have tabled it some time ago. So unless the member is going to actually talk about this motion, not in fact all of the bills coming forward in the House, I would prefer that we stick to this motion.
Yeah, Ms. McPherson, I believe she was addressing consequences of the motion. So I will allow this thought to be expressed. I think it's part of the consequences of what would happen if we go down this path.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Yes, Dr. Fry, on the same point of order.
I know. I would like to suggest that the freedom of a member of this committee to discuss and debate an issue of importance to this committee should not be curtailed by another member. The tradition of committees is that we discuss until we are happy, as we did with our report, until we're happy with the report, until we all believe that we can feel safe in putting that out.
As long as we were talking about the report.
And she is speaking about the report, Mr. Speaker. So I do think that that was not a point of order, as you so rightly pointed out. And I wanted to raise my voice to support you as a chair in deciding that this is not a valid point of order. Thank you.
I believe that Ms. McPherson was getting to the question of relevance. Your point was a broader one, which is the privilege of the member to speak unrestrained at committee. And that point is also important. I thank you both for the points of order. I pass the floor back to Ms. Sahota, unless there are additional comments on this point of order.
I would add to that point of order that I would hope that the chair cautions all members to make sure points of orders are points of order, and that yes, you can call on relevance, but you can't call on whether or not there are motivations behind the member's speech. That is up to the member. That's a long-standing tradition.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Oliphant. Any other points on this point of order? Okay, Ms. Sahota, we will give the floor back to you.
Thank you. I appreciate the comments that all my colleagues have made. I do take some exception to Ms. McPherson trying to get me back on track. I think I'm completely on track. I think it's important. I'm speaking to my amendment. My amendment is to remove the last sentence. One of parts of my amendment is to move the last sentence of the NDP motion. And I think it is important if we do get to a vote on my amendment or essentially the motion, unamended or amended, we need to understand what the impacts are. So I want to make it very clear that we all have a good understanding before we vote on these things. And also, I even want to maybe perhaps through this discussion that we're going to have on this, fully understand where perhaps the NDP or other parties that wish to support this amendment, the original amendment, where they were going with this and what the intention really is. You know, is it the intention for us to understand better about the COVAX initiative? Is it to better understand how Canada can play a better role in providing vaccines, not only to Canadians, but in supporting other countries? Is that essentially what we're trying to achieve, or are we trying to achieve something else? Now, I would argue that that last sentence, you know, is really there to try to achieve something else at the end of the day. And it's not just happening in this committee, it's happening in many, many, many committees. We're seeing many things being done so that all of House time is blocked up with opposition motions and concurrence motions. We're even seeing, you know, we just saw here on Tuesday, I guess actually, you know what, I won't mention that part, but we are seeing in other committees as well, you know, attempts to try to bring whatever issue it is, reports and such, to the House as quickly as possible so that they can be concurred in, so that there could be debate on those issues in the House. So I want us to fully understand, what's at stake here. I know that to McPherson and to her party, C-15 is incredibly important. C-15 is an act respecting the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. Now, this, UNDRIP was something that one of her esteemed colleagues from the NDP has worked very hard on making sure that the government would move on this piece of legislation so that we could recognize those rights within our own country. And it's very important to me, but seeing how things are evolving, I really hope that we get this work done in this Parliament. But if we continue to send all the work that we're supposed to do in committees to the House, then we're not going to get anywhere with House legislation at all. So why are we trying to get rid of work that we should rightfully be doing in this committee as members? We should be doing our job. We should be bringing perhaps the minister in, trying to figure out how this program of COVAX was put together, what it was intended for. We could be bringing in other witnesses if those proposals are on the table. But all I am seeing through this original motion is, let's make some value judgments and let's set it to the House so that we can block up legislation. That's what I'm seeing. So that's why I'm trying to get to somewhere where maybe we can come up with a solution that would better serve the sentiments behind, or at least I hope the true sentiments behind this motion. The original motion are to make sure that we're doing our role as a leader. And I would argue too that some of the language that was used in the motion, some of the language that I haven't even attempted to amend really, because I was trying to do the least amendments possible to the original motion so that I wouldn't offend, the original motion's intent. There's definitely language beyond that I'm not happy with, but I let it go, and I'm just trying to do the bare minimum so that we can still move on and do some important work and look into the whole COVAX initiative. So that's why I haven't removed the fact that COVAX was an initiative that was intended to provide vaccines to high-risk individuals in low and middle-class countries. I think there's a little bit of the intent of COVAX's program and the initiative. I think there's a failure to completely understand what the intent of that program was. And it is to provide equitable access, but that doesn't say that it's to deny any developed country access to COVAX. It was to ensure that all countries that were investing and supplementing this program could also benefit from this program. So it was an equal opportunity. And Canada, I'm really proud that Canada has invested, is a leader in the investments that it's made into COVAX. So I wanted to talk a little bit also about, hold on. Actually, before I get to that, another issue that I think is important is, God forbid, I don't want this to happen, and I don't think most members that sit on my other committee really would like that to happen. But we have, when I was interrupted before, I was about to say that we've got C-19 also in the House. That is election legislation. It is something that the Elections Commissioner has asked of us to pass so that they can prepare if there was to be an election in this pandemic. And, we don't control that necessarily or the government doesn't control that necessarily. Things can happen, and oftentimes, I'm getting to the point that—
Point of order again. Mr. Chair, do you still deem this relevant?
Making sure, taking up all this time.
Ms. Sahota. Ms. McPherson, your point of order?
Is this relevant? Do you find this is relevant to this motion?
I believe it is, yes.
Okay.
Ms. Sahota, go ahead, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So what I have been told, I haven't been a member of another minority parliament, but what I've been told of others that have been members of the minority parliaments is that things can occur, especially when we get to a point where there is a lot of disagreement, where legislation is no longer being able to essentially move through the House. You have a log jam, basically. No work is getting done. Canadians have sent us here to do work, to pass important legislation, for committees to work. Oftentimes we hear this ideal notion that minority parliaments are wonderful because there is so much cooperation and consensus building. And so I'm hoping that we can build some consensus at this committee today and, work together so that we are making sure that the House has its time to do the important work that is needed for Canadians. But if we don't work down that path in working together and we have that logjam, it is possible, it is possible that we could end up having an election. It's possible that we end up getting to a place where no one is willing to work together. And I would hate to see that happen. But I would really hate to see that happen before C-19 passes. So without having this election legislation passed and getting to second reading, getting to its committee so that the committee can do important work on that legislation, bring forward amendments, and then send it back to the House to go through the third stage, we won't have be able to give the Elections Commissioner the important powers that are needed in order to make sure that an election is run in the safest way possible for Canadians. So, I feel like it is our responsibility to make sure that we are doing the right thing for Canadians at the end of the day. So that is very important. And of course, we've got C12 in the House as well, an act respecting transparency and accountability in Canada's efforts to achieve net zero greenhouse gas emissions by the year 2050. I think that's a very important piece of legislation as well. And you're going to see that I'm hoping that the NDP and the Green Party are going to be very supportive of that legislation. And then who knows, maybe the Conservatives as well. You just never know. But I'm eager to see all that work get done in the House so I can, see for myself, what ends up happening. But right now, what's happening is nothing. It's absolutely nothing. And that is why I come back to, why it's important for us to revisit this motion, understand the repercussions that it would have in the House if we were to pass it as is. I think it would be actually a complete failure of this committee in doing its work. So that was some of the language that I wanted changed in the original motion. I don't think that the government's work in procuring vaccines for Canadians can be described as such. I, sincerely believe, and I know Canadians do too, and I know at the very least my colleagues will back me on this, is that we are currently seeing vaccines come into our country, and we're going to continue to see vaccines flow into Canada even faster than what might be doable by the provinces to roll it out. But I'm very optimistic. I think Canadians are too. I'm starting to hear a lot of relief on that end from my constituents. I know that they're very concerned. This is their number one concern, is getting vaccines to our seniors, to those that have, immunocompromised people, those that work at the front lines, making sure those vaccines get to them. So when we come back to COVAX, in terms of the amount of vaccines that Canada would be receiving through COVAX, I believe it's somewhere in the area of 1.9 million doses by the end of June through COVAX. So the majority of doses that we are currently receiving are through Moderna. We're receiving doses through AstraZeneca, and we're receiving Pfizer doses. Of course, Pfizer is the largest number that we're receiving. I was happy to hear. I know that there might be some delays in COVAX's shipments to developed countries, but I was
Point
happy
d'ordre,
to
Monsieur le
hear
Président.
that.
Point of order.
Je suis désolé.
I am sorry to interrupt my colleague, but I see that our Liberal colleagues have almost all raised their hands. Is this a filibuster to avoid adopting the motion before the end of the hour? Because 25 minutes have gone by. Ms. Sahota has been talking for 25 minutes. I have asked to address the issue, but I've not been given the floor. So if the idea is to avoid adopting the motion by the end of the day, perhaps we should just adjourn and go back home, because I'm very not pleased by what I'm saying today. I believe this is a filibustering from the government party to avoid adopting this motion, amended or not. So I came here, I had discussed with Ms. McPherson to come to a compromise, and what I can see here is that not too many people are willing to come to a compromise here. I'm very unpleased with what I am seeing now. Thank you very much for your point of order.
1 second. Let me just address briefly Monsieur Bergeron's point, Dr. Fry, then we'll go to you. It's my understanding that Ms. Sahota was very directly addressing the consequences of this motion and her perception of the vaccine distribution. I don't see that there's any issue with relevance. Monsieur Bergeron, you are actually in line to speak after Ms. McPherson and Dr. Fry. So you have your place in line. You will be able to share your reflections. And I don't believe procedurally, Madam Clerk, that this is a point of order, but maybe you could clarify for the committee.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
But 1 second, Dr. Fry. Let me just address Monsieur Bergeron's point. I'll go right to you. Madam Clerk, is there a point of order that can be raised on filibuster? I'm not aware, but you may have clarification.
No, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. Dr. Fry.
Mr. Chair, I understand Mr. Bergeron's concern and wondering if there is a hidden agenda here or whatever. The point is, according to rules of committee, a member is speaking, and when that member is finished, I would like to support her motion. That is part of what we do with a motion. When a motion is moved for an amendment, one supports it or one disagrees with it. My hand is up because I want to support her amendment with regard to removing that last sentence. And I would like to have the privilege as a committee member to speak to my support for that amendment and all the reasons why I think it is important. So my hand is still up, Mrs. Bengaman or Mr. Chair, to speak when my time comes. Thank you. I understand Mr. Bergeron's concern, but I think that one can always read hidden agenda in everything if one chooses to. But as far as I'm concerned, I do not have a hidden agenda. I want my point of privilege to be able to support the member's amendment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Fry. I think we're getting into points of debate that are being raised under points of order. Just for the members' benefit, for the moment, the speakers list following Ms. Sahota consists of Ms. McPherson, Dr. Fry, Monsieur Bergeron, and Mr. Fonseca.
Mr. Chair, just a point of order on the agenda. Could you clarify how much time this committee could go past 5:30 if it's the wish of the committee to do so? And I guess could you also clarify on our agenda, we're supposed to be considering the draft report on the Uyghur issue. Is there an intention to proceed to that at some point, or will we not get to that if the lengthy speeches continue on this particular issue? I wonder if you could just clarify those points on the agenda.
Mr. Genuis, thank you for the point of order. It is at the will of the committee what they choose next. The Uyghur report is an item on the agenda, not with a defined time frame, but it is an item that is on the agenda. I'm advised that tonight we will not have the ability to extend past 5:30, unless I stand corrected on that. That's the most recent advice I've received. And we will go back to Ms. Sahota.
Thank you. It's interesting that I heard my colleague, Mr. Genuis, who I have a lot of respect for, laugh at my perception of the vaccine rollout, I guess maybe was mentioned, but it's just interesting. I've spent many hours listening to Mr. Junius debate at length, and oftentimes just read out of textbooks, which I have found barely.
I have never done that.
Very hard to link
I've always
to the
filibustered extemporaneously.
very. Oh no! I have seen you read out of textbooks.
Find the clip.
Mr. Junius,
let's stay with the speakers list, colleagues, please.
I will send that clip to you for sure. But anyways, I did still think that he always found a way to link it back to the issue at hand. And at this point, I would say that I have not strayed from the issue at hand at all. I'm just trying to find, my intention really right now is to find that consensus for my amendment so that we can move forward. And I know the draft report consideration, like Mr. Junius has mentioned, is very important as well. If you would like to table this amendment for now, that's okay with me if there's consensus at the committee. To table this issue right now and move on to the draft report, that's fine. I think that's important work that this committee could be doing. But when it comes to this motion, I remain that I want to retain, I guess, my right to be able to speak to my amendment until I feel I can garner some support on my positions. So I'll go back unless I hear from committee members otherwise. And you're free to talk amongst yourself, maybe if you like, to see if you have some consensus you can build. That is fine. I'm willing to amend my amendment, maybe have a sub amendment if somebody thinks that might be appropriate. But I just don't think that the original motion as stands in its original form is appropriate. So I'll continue to explain why.
Okay, sorry, just a point of order again, Mr. Chair. I'd like to seek unanimous consent for the following. Could we first allow Ms. McPherson?
Hold on, Mr. Junius. I'm not sure that you can introduce the motion on a point of order.
Well, it's unanimous consent, so if people aren't interested in hearing it, that's their business. I'm trying to create a procedure by which we can at least get the Uyghur report done. So if people want to give me an opportunity to move unanimous consent to do that,
let's hear it. Let's hear it briefly,
okay.
Mr. Junius. Go ahead.
Thank you. So what I would propose, if there's unanimous consent for this, is that Ms. McPherson be allowed to deliver some just brief remarks on this issue. Then we will adjourn debate on this issue. Adjourning debate doesn't mean a vote on the issue. It means it can be brought back at a future point. But then we would adjourn debate on this issue, and that would still leave us hopefully with 20 or so minutes to address the Uyghur report so that we can at least get something done. That's my proposal for unanimous consent. And if somebody doesn't like it, then
Point of order, Mr. Speaker. Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Let's stay in sequence here. There's a point of order. There's a point of order on Mr. Junius's point of order raised by Dr. Fry.
Mr. Chair, there are procedures in place. It's written in a book that we all were given when we first became MPs on how committees and standing committees must proceed with the work that they have to do. We cannot suddenly decide that we don't want to follow those procedures and create our own new procedures. That is out of order as far as I'm concerned, Mr. Chair. The order at the moment is that a member has duly, according to her privilege, introduced an amendment to a motion on the floor. We will debate, because that is what the points, the rules say. She will debate her own points of order, and those of us who support her or do not support her have an opportunity to speak to or against her amendment. The rule of the order on the floor right now is the debating of an amendment to a motion introduced by Ms. McPherson. And until the debate on that amendment is finished, there should be nothing else moving that procedure off, because that would therefore be against the order of the committee's rules at the moment. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Dr. Fry, thank you. And I take it that through your 1 second, Mr. Junius. Mr. Junius, 1 second, please. 1 second. Yeah. Let's stay in sequence here. I take it, Dr. Fry, that through your point of order, you've expressed the view that there is no unanimous consent on Mr. Junius's.
Fair enough.
Exactly, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
Yes.
And then we will pass the floor back to Ms. Sahota.
Yeah, well, I kind of had a point of order there too. I want some clarification on the points of order that just took place right now. I know that you can't move a motion on a point of order, but what was tricky there is that Mr. Genuis was not just trying to get consensus on moving to the draft report and tabling this issue for now and maybe coming back to it later, but he was also trying to take my position on the floor away from me and give it to McPherson. So yeah. I don't think I'm willing to cede the floor right now. So can I get clarification on that as well? If that's where I'm most confused.
And procedurally, we may need some advice here. And Ms. Hoda, I think what you're raising implicitly is a point of privilege. So maybe we can pass that to the clerk to help us sift through that and see how to best answer it. But I believe we do not at this point have unanimous consent in any event, which would lead the floor to revert to you. But Madam Clerk, could you advise?
Mr. Chair, I would suggest that when you gave the floor to Mr. Genuis after he indicated that he was seeking unanimous consent, he did at that point legitimately have the floor. However, he does not have unanimous consent to move that motion or for it to be agreed to. So at this point, I would consider that any debate on this is collapsed and the floor would be returned to Ms. Sahota.
Thank you very much. And Madam Clerk, just for future incidents, is it permissible then to raise a point of unanimous consent, if that's the right term, on a point of order? A question of unanimous consent on a point of order rather than a motion?
No.
Can a member solicit the unanimous consent of the committee at any time through a point of order?
No, Mr. Chair. Points of order are really reserved for when a member thinks that the rules of the committee are being breached. And they would have to indicate which rule is being breached to make it a proper point of order.
That's helpful to all members, I believe, Madam Clerk.
Mr. Chair, just a clarification of that then. I mean, this happens, my understanding of the committee rules is that a committee can do anything it wants by unanimous consent. It's a moot point anyways because we don't have unanimous consent. But that's, and secondly, this happens all the time in the House, right? We constantly have members of the House rising on points of order to seek unanimous consent on points of procedure or substantive matters. So is the point that can happen in the House, but it can't happen in committee?
That's not what you're seeking. That's not what you're seeking.
So, Mr. Chair, if I may,
please.
The committee can proceed to some things on unanimous consent, but it is a freedom with limitations. You cannot overturn the standing orders, for example, and you cannot overturn higher procedural authorities. So, in this particular case, once you had moved your point of order and gotten the attention of the chair and the chair gave you the floor legitimately, then you could seek unanimous consent. In the House, unanimous consent is really used to move along procedure. For example, unanimous consent being sought for concurrence in committee reports of PROC for membership changes, for example. So those are the real reasons that unanimous consent is generally used. In committee, it can be used the same way. And in this case, I would suggest that it was, but it did not pass.
Perfect. That's helpful, Madam Clerk. Thank you very much. And the floor reverts to Ms. Sahota.
Okay, now to remember where I left off, that was helpful though. That, every time you learn a little bit more about procedure and it updates, refreshes your memory or your knowledge. But I think I was at the point that I wanted to make about the initial reason for the WHO having initiated
Sorry,
and coordinated.
Mr. Chair, I would like to raise a point of order.
Yes, Mr. Oliphant, please.
And I was trying to, but my microphone was up on my head. I just wanted on the record that I do not think it is appropriate to use a point of order to make what was a de facto motion. And that I believe that was, and I don't want it to become the standard of this committee. I want to make it, I'm not making a motion. I'm wanting to make it very
editorial
clear.
Comment.
Will you let somebody just speak, Mr. Garnett, when they're speaking?
It's not a point of order.
Colleagues, let's please maintain order. Mr. Oliphant has the floor.
It is a point of order, and I'm not going to challenge the chair on this. However, I want to make it very clear in the record of the committee that at least that I am saying that it is not appropriate for the chair to be giving the floor to someone in the midst of someone's speech who then uses it to make a de facto motion and request unanimous consent. I do believe the clerk was right by saying that once he had the floor, he could actually make a motion, which he asked then if we had unanimous consent to do it. However, the problem was prior to that, when the floor was yielded to him, when it wasn't truly a point of order. And so I'm just wanting to make sure that we don't go down that road, because we would then be outside the standing orders, where you can only make a motion when you duly have the floor, which we have decided by convention on this committee is by speaker's order, in a list kept jointly by the chair and the clerk. And I really think that was a very difficult moment, and I think it needs to be noted in our minutes.
Mr. Oliphant, thank you, and that confirms the advice of the clerk. There's another point of order.
Point of order on that. Mr. Chair, Mr. Oliphant's comments do not confirm the advice of the clerk, because what the clerk had said was that it is a reasonable practice within the existing framework of the standing orders for unanimous consent motions to be proposed, which are designed to facilitate or expedite the work of the committee. And that is what I was seeking to do. I was trying to propose by unanimous consent a procedure that would allow us to actually get through the work we need to get done. Now, there were members on the government side who rejected that unanimous consent motion. That's fine. That's their right. But it is very common, including during filibuster scenarios. It happened at PROC during filibuster scenarios where unanimous consent was sought to do things procedurally, to move things along, or to create certain accommodations. For instance, okay, in the middle of a speech, you say unanimous consent to suspend, unanimous consent to allow someone else to intervene. The use of unanimous consent for procedural abridgment is very common and is necessary for the well-functioning of the committee. And if one person doesn't like it, they can always simply say no to that point of unanimous consent. But that is normal and proper, and I'm trying to propose a path forward. If members don't like that path forward, if they don't want to move on from this debate to create time for something else to be done, that's fine. They can say no to unanimous consent, but this is a normal procedure, and that's been confirmed by the clerk's advice.
Mr. Genuous, thank you for that. I just want to circle back one more time to the clerk, because the way I understood it is that a desire or the solicitation of unanimous consent is not properly sought on a point of order, which is really just to clarify a breach of the standing orders with reference to a particular standing order that the member, in her or his perception, has been broken. Madam Clerk, how do members seek, and at what point can they seek the unanimous consent of the committee for procedural or other reasons?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On a point of order, you may not move a motion, including a motion for unanimous consent. In this particular case, Mr. Genuous moved his point of order, and then you did indicate that you were going to give him the floor. At that point, he had the floor legitimately. Usually, in the normal course of things, members will gain the floor legitimately through their turn on the speaking list, or if the chair gives them the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam Clerk. That is helpful. And Ms. Sahota, back to you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I'd like to reflect a little bit on that as well. I'm just thinking back to maybe perhaps something I said may have instigated some of this, and that was for us to work together to come up with a solution, a compromise, and perhaps, Mr. Garnett or Mr. Genuous was trying to jump the gun a little bit to try to get to perhaps that consensus. So, I give him the benefit of the doubt that maybe he wasn't trying to do something tricky, but I do feel like he was giving up my position on the floor. However, maybe to get to a better place, but I think he can definitely raise his hand if he hasn't done so in the toolbar, and Miss McPherson is next as well. So they will definitely have their time to present or propose different compromises that perhaps would be feasible to move this committee in a positive direction and get us working on something that will help Canadians and working on issues that will help people around the world. So the purpose of COVAX, that's where I was at. The purpose of COVAX, I think this motion, the original motion at least, it fails to understand what the real purpose behind this initiative really was. So COVAX was a global vaccine sharing initiative that a whole bunch of countries joined into. And the goal of this initiative was to accelerate the development and the manufacturing of COVID-19 vaccines. And this was to guarantee fair and equitable access to every country in the world. So it was not at the expense of the investing countries to not be able to get any vaccines out of this initiative or out of these the vaccines that are manufactured. Nowhere did it say that countries, wealthy countries, are to invest without receiving anything in return. Actually, it was quite the opposite. The whole purpose of this initiative was that so the countries that invested also were to receive some benefit out of this program, and by doing so, my personal belief is it encourages more countries to enter into this program, which helps supplement vaccines for the developing world to other countries as well. And I think at some point I was mentioning, we just heard an announcement that Ghana has received 600,000, I believe, vaccines through COVAX just the other day. There might be some delays there as well, but I mean, many countries are seeing delays when it comes to vaccines. We've seen delays for various reasons that are outside of our control because the ramping up of manufacturing, the changes to lines and all of that. So, but it is still good news that we are starting to see these vaccines from COVAX roll out. And I think in large part, it's good that Canada has played a large role in that being possible today. Initially, I wanted to, our initial investment, and there have been more since then, but our initial investment in September was for $440 million. And of which this investment was going to secure doses for Canadians, and for half of this investment was going to secure doses for Canadians, and the other half was going to go towards helping other countries. So right there, that is the agreement that Canada had entered into. So I understand, like I said at the beginning, the sentiments and the emotions that may take us away from perhaps what we think this program was all about and what it actually was all about. So I wanted to also mention that, like I have mentioned before, and I'm sure many of my colleagues might be aware that other countries such as Singapore, New Zealand, and there are many others growing on that list, have also done, have also secured vaccines through this program, just like Canada. And, I wanted to also, we've heard the minister also. There's been a lot of questions in the House already on this issue, right? So the ministers are there at question period. They're there to answer questions on these issues. However, I understand that my colleagues may want to get more in-depth answers on this issue so that we can understand this program better. And I of the mindset that would be a great idea. I think that'd be great to have the minister come and explain this program to us a little bit better. The minister has been explaining in the media. She's been explaining in the press. Minister Gould has been explaining in question period. And I know that some of the opposition members in this committee as well have posed questions in various on various different platforms, and question period is always there. It's a part of our House proceedings and House time to raise these important issues. But I think otherwise, it's important for us to recognize that the committee should be doing that work, and it should not be taking over legislative time to debate this issue. So I think I lost my place here. Hold on. Sorry, just a second here. Okay, so I wanted to talk a little bit about the Gavi, yes, the terms and conditions that Gavi had outlined for participants in COVAX, right? The terms and conditions itself, they had stated that these terms and conditions set out the basis on which self-financing economies will participate in the COVID-19 vaccine global access facility, and that all economies are invited to participate, and all participating economies will benefit by securing access to vaccine supply made available through the facility. So this is actually in the terms and conditions of the agreement that was signed by the government. It goes on to state that economies of all financial means can participate with the degree of support for the COVAX AMC eligible economies determined by the resources raised by the COVAX AMC. The world will need to work together to overcome the pandemic, and the facility will work best with as many economies as possible, committing to this collaborative global effort. Everybody contributes so that everyone can benefit. This principle will be realized through clear political and financial commitments. Okay, so when we see that this is a part of the terms and conditions laid out at the onset, then I would argue that the motion that we're trying to pass at this committee is really false. It's a false notion. It's a false narrative, and it's a very partisan narrative that is trying to be spun against the best interests of, I would argue, Canadians, and against the best interests of people around the world as well. This is a really big issue right now. Vaccines for Canadians and for people around the world is a big issue. And Canada has stepped forward to make sure that Canadians are served well, but not just Canadians, that those around the world will also benefit. So that's very important for us to make sure that we remember, and that we don't continue to, continue to raise this false narrative and worry people that somehow Canada is, gobbling up all the vaccines out of this program. That's absolutely false. It's absolutely false. And like I said, the vaccines that Canada has secured through this program are not even going to be received by Canadians by Canada until the end of June. So this issue right now, I think, is something that we should explore in our committee by bringing the minister in, by having other witnesses to see perhaps what the actual impacts and effects are. And I don't know, I would gather that as vaccine manufacturing is ramping up, and we're seeing it right before our eyes right now, and we're going to see it in the weeks to come as well, that since Canada has secured so many doses of vaccines, and we will have our population and all those that desire to be vaccinated by the end of September, that all of the vaccines that are going to be in surplus will surely be going back to countries that need it the most. So, not only what we've contributed into COVAX to make sure that we're accelerating and increasing the capacity that they have in this initiative, but also so the other vaccines that we've secured outside of COVAX are also going to be going towards aid as well. So that's really important. Canada is going to be giving back and already has been paying it forward in a really big way. And I think that should be recognized. And I don't think Canadians should be tricked into believing this false narrative that somehow Canada is not stepping up, it's not fulfilling its international role and duty. I just don't think that that is fair. Minister Gould has also, been very, very clear on this. She said, and the questions that have been asked to her at committee, she did say that COVAX was intentionally set up to have wealthy countries contribute both to procure vaccines and grow purchasing power so it could subsidize vaccines for low-income countries while working for equitable access. Canada was the second largest. She said we're the second largest contributor to the COVAX ANC, and we're proud of that. It's a historic that we've been able to create. We've been able to collaborate with other countries and help be a part of such a fantastic initiative that is going to help so many people around the world. So I think we should be proud that we've helped set up this historic global mechanism. So moving on from those points, if I don't have everyone convinced that, this is an interesting issue and we should look at it in the House, in committee, sorry, not in the House. Absolutely, that's not what my intention is. I don't think we're going to achieve anything in the House on this issue, because all that's going to happen in the House is members are going to get up and give speeches on this issue. Then what? So we have Conservative members who'll give their speeches. They'll have their allotted time. We'll have 3 hours on the issue, let's say, and then we'll have a vote. And the vote will be to what? To make a statement, to make a declaration of some sort. I mean, I think what we can do in this committee goes far beyond that. And I just don't think that vaccines and the health of Canadians and the health of people around the world should be politicized in this way. I, for myself, can definitely say, and I'm sure that many members sitting around this virtual committee table today can attest to the fact that the beginning of this pandemic, and I would say well into this pandemic, what Canadians were most proud of were our parties working together for the benefit of Canadians. I heard that many times from my constituents that they like to see, cross-partisanship, collaboration. They like to see us working together. They like to see the different levels of government working together. Absolutely, Peter. That's exactly what they like to see. They like to see us hand in hand working hard for Canadians. And, this reeks a little bit of scoring political points and partisanship. That's what this looks like to me. So that's my personal opinion. I do think that there's a reason that, that last sentence was added in. And I don't think it was added in for any genuine purpose. I think it was added in because of what I had just stated. It's to gain some political points, unnecessary ones, really, because what we could be doing is we could be talking about, and I think committees is where we do the most collaborative work. And I always tell people this, like when I'm mentoring young people that talk to me and come to seek advice as to whether they should get into politics, and they think it's, such an ugly place. They talk about question period and the ugliness they see in question period. I tell them no. There is a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes. There's a lot of camaraderie, a lot of friendships that get developed. There's a lot of cooperation, even cross-party, and a lot of that work happens at committee. And so people are not as tuned into committee. I mean, there might be some people watching us today since we're public. And of course, I'd like to thank all the people that are watching Foreign Affairs Committee today. However, I'm also not, naive. I don't think there's that many people that have the time to tune into committee work. But a lot of people do see the little clips in question period, right? And so they start thinking that, this is what it's all about. It's all about the fighting and, the one-sided questions and answers for that fact, for that matter. But I don't think so. I think there's so many places that they don't get to see an in-depth look at because they're busy working. They're busy trying to make ends meet. And we know in this pandemic now, extremely busy, and if they are having to isolate and they are having to stay home, they're worried and they have something else on their mind, not figuring out, will the House of Commons have a 3-hour debate on COVAX? Or can we work together in this committee and can we come up with, a compromise where we can maybe see how programs like this, more initiatives could be created, how we can improve the health of Canadians and those around the world. And I'm really enjoying the current study that we're doing. However, it's extremely heavy. I must say that it's very heavy. And actually, I've got to say to Miss McPherson's credit, like the work that she's done in aid and development, it takes somebody with a really big heart to be able to do that work. And also it leaves an emotional impact. So I have a lot of respect for actually all my colleagues for the hard work that they do. So in conclusion, really what I want to just get to, I want to get to a point where we can start doing something really interesting in this committee.
Ms. Sahota, I'm
Mr.
sorry,
Chair,
let me
order.
interrupt you there.
Mr. Chair, point of order. Point of
yes,
order.
Mr. Chung.
I believe if you seek it, you may find unanimous consent for the following motion. In the interests of many people anticipating the subcommittee's report on the Uyghur genocide, that the committee adopt the report of the Subcommittee on International Human Rights titled Human Rights Situation of the Uyghurs, and that the chair report this report to the House.
Mr. Chung, that is a motion that should not be brought on a point of order. I see heads shaking. I undertake that to mean that there is no unanimous consent at the moment. In any event, I was going to interrupt Ms. Sahota and let the committee know that we're at 5:30, that this is a hard constraint tonight because of other committee work taking place, and that with your consent, we adjourn this discussion.
Point of order, Mr. Chair. I'd like to challenge the chair.
Sure, but let me just finish.
Challenge the chair's ruling with respect to Mr. Chong's motion.
Okay, I've been challenged on the ruling with respect to Mr. Chong's motion that it was not properly brought on a point of order. Madam Clerk, first of all, we have the 5:30 time issue. We may have a minute to deal with this. We may not. I'm in your hands on this. And in any event, I don't believe that we should simply override the fact that we do have a hard time constraint at 5:30 with respect to other committees having to do their work.
Let's put on the challenge.
Mr. Chair, I move that this meeting be now adjourned.
I've challenged the chair. We have to take a vote on the challenge to the chair.
Okay, let's get advice to unravel this.
No, this committee be now adjourned is a priority motion. I'm sorry.
Dilatory motion.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr.
Ms.
Chair.
Fry
But
did not have the floor when she moved that.
Neither did you. Neither did Mr. Chong.
Mr. Chair, if I may.
Please, Madam Clerk.
A challenge to the decision of the chair is also a dilatory motion that we would need to decide right away. But I just need to clarify, was your decision that Mr. Chong did not have the floor correctly to seek unanimous consent?
That is correct.
Okay.
Well, then.
And that's why I was challenged by Mr. Genuis.
Okay. So Mr. Genuis is challenging the decision of the chair. When I call your name, say yay if you are in support of the decision of the chair, and say, shall the decision of the chair be sustained is the motion. So say yay if you are in support of the chair, and nay if you would like to overturn the decision. Mr. Fonseca.
Yay in support of the chair.
Dr. Fry.
Yes, in support of the chair's ruling.
Mr. Oliphant.
Yay, in support.
Ms. Sahota.
Yay.
Ms. Sachs.
Yay in support of the chair.
Mr. Chong.
Nay.
Mr. Diot.
Nay.
Mr. Genuis.
Nay.
Mr. Morantz.
Nay.
Monsieur Bergeron.
No.
Ms. McPherson.
Nay.
So, Mr. Chair, there are 6 nays and 5 yays, so your decision is overturned.
Mr.
That
Chair.
means, and effectively, Madam Clerk, is
Yeah, I
that
have
Mr.
the
Chong
floor.
gets to seek the unanimous consent of the committee.
That's
Mr.
right.
Chong.
So I move, Mr. Chair, that the committee adopt the report of the subcommittee on international human rights titled Human Rights Situation of the Uyghurs, and that the chair report this report to the House of Commons.
Point of order. Point of order.
Okay, Ms. Sahota, there's a point of order on Mr. Chong's motion.
No, I am confused about this, and I need to understand this better. Earlier, we heard from the clerk that that codified procedures, they are superior and they stand, above any other unanimous consent motions or something that we would call for. And we had just heard that, after me, if I was even seen to have ceded the floor, it would have been Miss McPherson's turn next. Mr. Chong raised a point of order and then continued to move a motion, on that point of order. The chair ruled according to what procedure and practice states. So how can that be challenged when it's not really a discretionary ruling that the chair made? The chair did not make that ruling based on his own discretion. He made it because he had to make that. There was no other ruling he could have made.
On the same point of order.
So, Madam Clerk, if you can just explain, is that a ruling that could have properly been challenged?
You did not cede the floor to him.
Mr. Chair, in committee, members are free to challenge the decision of the chair. In this case, your ruling was that Mr. Chong did not properly have the floor. The decision was challenged, and the majority of the committee members determined that Mr. Chong did properly have the floor.
Which means that he now properly has the floor, unless there's a point of order on his current
I have a point of order.
But he had the floor properly. That's why I was interested. That's why I was interested in that the way the question was posed originally on the challenge. The question was posed, did he properly have the floor? I don't think that was the question. Yes, he had properly had the floor on a point of order, but he did not properly have a point of order. Does not provide you the opportunity to move this type of a motion. So yes, he had the floor, but not the ability to move a motion such as this. So shouldn't that be the question?
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Dr. Fry, yes.
I think that the clerk, in the original instance in which Mr. Genuis had asked for point of order and then used that to be able, and the chair had ceded the floor to him, and to move a motion to get unanimous consent, the clerk had made a very clear ruling on that he had been given the floor in order to speak to whatever his motion was. Then we had Mr. Chong, when there was a debate on the floor, when there was a motion to end the meeting, that Mr. Chong came up with his own, having asked for point of order, did not speak to a point of order, moved a motion instead. And what is my understanding, the chair said he did not allow Mr. Chong to have the floor to speak to that motion. And that was what we're ruling on. And if we're going to play politics with clear rulings that have been made by the clerk and that are in the actual rule book, the standing orders book of standing committees, then what is the point of even looking at rules? Let's just have a free-for-all. It seems to me that if we want to work together as a committee, and Ms. Sahota has spoken about this repeatedly, that she thinks we should all work together. How do we ever get to work together when there is such disrespect shown for the rules, for the chair, and when someone is speaking, a person does not wait their turn, they just jump in and decide that they're going to utilize a bona fide rule, which is point of order.
And what about disrespect for your colleagues?
Point of order, and to speak over someone when they're speaking. This happens a lot in this committee. No one waits their turn, and they just talk whenever they feel like it. So, Madam Chair, I am just suggesting that I think that if we accept that the chair was wrong in his ruling, then we are actually throwing away the rule book of standing committee.
Dr. Fry, I appreciate the point. Let me just see if we can unravel this to the point where my ruling had been overturned to give Mr. Chong the floor. He has the floor. He was trying to seek unanimous consent. He can't pass a motion, but he can seek unanimous consent on a ruling that's overturned mine. If I detect that there is, as I do seem to detect that there is no unanimous consent to accept this motion, in light of the fact that we're well past 5:30 and now cutting into the time of 2 other committees, that we adjourn and continue this discussion at the next possible opportunity. I think there's lots of views, both on procedure and on substance, most importantly on substance of Ms. McPherson's motion, that still need to be unpacked. I take all the points that have been made by all members on all sides with respect to privilege and the importance of parliamentary dialogue. We're simply at the point now where
Point of order, Mr. Chair. Point of order. Mr. Chong, as a result of the vote of the committee, has a right to seek unanimous consent for the motion.
Yes.
At that point, any member can say no to his request for unanimous consent. And at that point, the meeting can adjourn. All of that needs to only take 30 seconds. I have much to say about the procedural issues raised here, but I will save that for another time, perhaps for private conversation. But please allow Mr. Chong to move his motion according to the wish of the committee.
He can't move a motion,
right,
Mr. Genuis, but he can seek, and through the shaking of heads, I had gained
I
the
do
perception
not have unanimous consent. There is no unanimous consent.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Fry. And then with the consent of the committee, I believe this is a point where we should adjourn tonight's discussion and resume it at the very next opportunity. And I thank all members for their views, and the vibrancy of the discussion reflects the importance of both the procedural and the substantive issues. And I wish you a safe and good evening, and we will see you at the next opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you, Tara.
Thank you.